Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe and explore. Ash clung to her skin like guilt, thin, persistent, unwelcome. No one remembered who first called her that name, but it stuck like rot on old wood. Bastard dustborn. Spoken with spit, laughed through broken teeth, passed between guards like stale wine. Each time, she flinched a little less. Not because it stopped hurting, because nothing responded when it did. The kitchen reeked of boiled roots and old iron. Somewhere above, gold-braided sleeves brushed past carved stone, and jeweled heels tapped the marbled corridors in rhythms she could only imagine. Down here, knives dulled against bone, steam scorched the air, and words hit harder than fists. She moved like a ghost sewn into linen, present, unseen, easy to forget. Even the scullery dogs had names. Even the rats had corners they claimed. She slept beneath the salt crate, curled where the floor dipped inward from years of careless feet and spilled brine. The guards liked her quiet. It gave them room to speak. They waited for her to pass near the barrel fires or rinse their cups to spit something new. Sometimes they recited possible fathers. A butcher. A traitor. A thing that crawled from the mines. Their favorite was the dead king himself, and that always made them howl. She never looked up, never blinked too long. Reaction fed them. They ate her silence like meat, picked it clean. One winter, a noble's hound snapped off 2 of her fingers for reaching too close with a soup bowl. The steward gave her a strip of cloth and nothing more. No one asked why she kept feeding the animal. No one asked if she could still hold a tray with one good hand and a scarred stump. She could. That was enough. Even the light in that place felt cruel. A smoky kind of glow that painted bruises in yellow instead of purple. Her hair carried grease no soap could lift. Nails broken, feet wrapped in mismatched rags. She didn't ask for shoes. Shoes belonged to someone going somewhere. The old cook once said she looked like grief had taken a daughter and left its shadow behind. No one laughed at that. Not because it was untrue, but because it cut too close to something no one wanted named. She had a voice, once, before memory hardened and became utility, before language turned into calculation, before every word had to justify its exit from her mouth. By then, no one remembered what she sounded like. Not even her. On feast days, she stood just outside the hall, holding plates for men who wouldn't look her in the eyes. Her fingers trembled less than the goblets did. She learned to move like poured water, shapeless, necessary, expected to disappear. There were no mirrors in the scullery. No reflection to argue with. Just surfaces that rejected her outline. Once, she found an old ring beneath the grain sack. Gold, dented, crusted with wax. She turned it between her fingers until the steward caught her. The slap wasn't what stung. It was the way he looked at her, as if she'd stolen something her blood had no right to touch. She dropped it and didn't flinch when he stepped on her hand. At night, the walls cracked in cold silence. The hearth died early. Her blanket was a flour sack that smelled of rot. Somewhere nearby, the castle's war horns were polished for show, not battle. Trumpets blared for heirs who never came. Portraits hung above empty thrones. Names were recited for bloodlines that ended before memory. Still she endured. Not out of hope, just out of repetition. No one noticed the girl with the ruined hand kneeling to scrub stones older than her name. No one counted her among the living. Not really. She was function. Noise that didn't speak. A container for mockery. A reflection too low to cast shadow. She never cried. Not because she didn't want to. Because there was no one to stop it once it started. Snow settled without permission, pressing itself across rooftops and courtyards like a silence no one requested. Smoke rose without motion. Bells rang dry, without rhythm. The city did not mourn. It held its breath. Guards stood double at the gates, not to protect the dead but to cage the living. No banners dropped. No horns sang. Instead, a low drumbeat pounded through corridors not built for grief, its cadence marking the moment power lost its shape. He died without witness. No hand clasped his, no eye caught the last look. Only the bloodless ring rolled from his palm, stopped against the foot of a chair too large for one man and now too small for none. In the great hall, nobles gathered like birds circling an invisible fire. Their robes whispered of loyalty. Their fingers tightened around seals of office, hoping paper could do what blood could not. No heir stepped forward. No name answered the call. The relic that sealed the throne, forged generations ago in the breath of something old and long buried, stayed inert beneath its veil of dust and oil. It pulsed only for lineage. It had not stirred. Whispers moved faster than servants. Down stone corridors and across candlelit passages they passed, each retelling thinner than the last. A hidden child. A mistake. A secret sworn into bone. Some said the king had fathered a daughter with a girl of the outer tribes. Others claimed a son existed, cloaked in exile beneath another name. But no search began. No orders left the palace walls. The risk was in the asking. Councilmen argued behind closed panels while the kitchen fires burned low. Every door watched every other door. Loyalty hardened into performance. Eyes narrowed for weakness, not truth. Even the high priest refused to stand near the throne. One noble sent his hounds through the archives. Another burned his own family tree in private, fearing what the relic might accept. Guards became bolder. With no blood to obey, their oaths dissolved into posture and cruelty. In the lower quarters, laughter disappeared first. Girls carried water in silence, even when their arms shook. One boy lost a tooth for spilling wine near the Hall of Records. His mother bowed and thanked the man who struck him. Gratitude made things safer. She continued to serve beneath the scent of spoiled meat and rinsed-out vinegar. Her fingers, wrapped in old cloth, reached for pots with quiet knowledge. No one told her what had happened, but she felt it. Not in words. In temperature. In pace. In how the guards watched without speaking. In how footsteps slowed where once they ran. In how no one called her worthless that week, because no one looked her way at all. The relic remained sealed. Some tried to lift it. Some tried to bribe it. One priest even bled on its base, offering himself in some twisted claim of rebirth. The relic remained stone. No light. No sound. No acceptance. Outside, markets grew smaller. Soldiers refused to leave their posts. The border colonies sent no messages. Couriers vanished or stopped writing altogether. The land waited confused. The people watched the sky. Inside the palace, beneath the carved lion mouths and decaying banners, silence began to ferment into something sharper. Not fear. Not yet. Something earlier. Something with fewer names and sharper edges. She slept in the cold. She ate whatever the dogs left behind. And still the relic waited. As if it knew something no one else remembered. As if it had seen a face no one had thought to search for. Dust blew in sideways that morning, slicing low across the stones like a warning. No one welcomed it. Not the guards shifting from foot to foot, not the merchants closing their shutters with too much noise, not the children whose mouths had forgotten how to form questions. The wind bit without apology and dragged with it someone no one expected. He did not arrive on horseback. No plume. No armor. No flag. Boots cracked from sun, sleeves torn where seams once held. At his side hung a pouch too thin to matter, and around his neck, a rusted disc darkened with age. No one recognized the symbol. Not fully. But something about it scratched at memory. One of the guards tilted his head, squinted, and snorted. Another let his spear rest against the wall and spat. A scavenger, they said. Or worse, someone chasing a story that died 100 years ago. The gate did not open for him. He waited. Arms slack, gaze level, weight balanced like someone used to denying hunger its voice. He didn't shout or plead. When asked his business, he offered no story. Just held up the disc. The guards laughed so hard one of them dropped his ration. The dust didn't settle. It clung to him like accusation. A kind of silence followed, the kind that knew too much had been seen and said too quickly. Still he stood there, not defiant, not meek, just present in a way that made some uncomfortable and others irritated. By noon, he had been forgotten by most. Not removed. Not welcomed. Just left. The guards returned to their rhythm, snide remarks growing stale with repetition. A servant brought water. He didn't take it. When offered coin to move along, he placed the disc on the ground beside his foot and stepped back. No explanation followed. She noticed first from the kitchens. Not because he stood out, but because he didn't. Everyone else carried themselves like they wanted to be known or forgotten. This man looked as if he'd been remembered by mistake. His eyes didn't roam like the others. They fixed on corners, on small movements, on her. No one else looked at her like that. Not with recognition, not even with curiosity, as if he saw something behind her shape, as if her presence had meaning. No smirk, no pity, just the weight of attention without judgment. She didn't move, didn't return the look, but something tightened behind her ribs and refused to let go. The guards eventually let him pass. Not by order, not by invitation. He stepped forward once they stopped watching. No one remembered giving him permission, but no one stopped him either. He crossed the threshold without ceremony, tracked mud across stones scrubbed raw by generations of forgotten hands. He did not ask for directions. He didn't seek the throne. He walked like someone who'd already seen what mattered and didn't care for the rest. Those who passed him frowned without knowing why. She kept her head low, hands buried in the warmth of a copper basin, body half turned toward the scent of singed herbs. But her mind followed each step he took, each pause, each glance that found her again. A different kind of fire moved through her, thin and quiet but impossible to shake. Not fear, not hope, just the sense that something impossible had entered the place, not with noise or light, but with memory. Not his. Hers. The basin slipped sideways, splashing herb-stained water across stone. She bent without thinking, fingers outstretched to catch it before it cracked. A hand reached hers, wrong in color, in warmth, in familiarity. Not a guard's slap, not a steward's shove. Calloused, yes, but careful. Intent without force. She flinched on instinct but didn't pull back. The contact was brief. His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist, not with curiosity, but certainty. A sound escaped him. Not language, just air breaking under weight. He dropped to one knee, reaching again, gripping her arm as if it were a relic he'd crossed salt and silence to find. The cloth slid down. Beneath the ashen oil, a mark curved inward, sharp-edged, half-hidden beneath bruised skin and burn lines. It wasn't tattooed. It wasn't carved. It pulsed faint beneath the surface, like memory refusing to die. A guard caught movement, barked something half-hearted until another saw what the man was holding. Laughter turned brittle. Boots scraped stone. The man rose, eyes still on her wrist, and spoke a word none had heard in years. A name. Not hers. Not yet. But close enough to wound. The spear came fast. The first strike caught his shoulder. The second broke his grip. His face hit the tiles without ceremony. He didn't cry out. Didn't fight back. They dragged him by the collar while one spat near his face. Worthless desert trash, they called him. Another mad foreigner sniffing bloodlines. He didn't answer. Two guards seized her next. Rough hands, sharper voices. The mark had vanished beneath dirt again, but suspicion had already taken hold. They called her witchborn. Said she'd cast a spell on a beggar's coin. She didn't resist. No scream. No plea. Just that silence she wore like second skin. She stumbled once. Someone kicked her forward. Her ankle turned inward. No one stopped. She was thrown into the grain room, the one with no windows, no lock on the outside because no one wanted what went in to come back out. The door slammed. Voices faded. Darkness pressed in. Mold thick in the air. Her chest tightened, not from fear, not exactly. More from the memory of how quickly everything had cracked open. That man's face. His eyes. The way he looked at her arm like it answered a question only he remembered asking. She pressed her back to the wall, knees drawn close, and let one breath escape too hard. In another room, someone picked up the rusted disc he left behind. Meant to mock. A guard tossed it aside. It rolled to a stop beside the hearth, lightless, cold. A minute passed. Then something shifted in its surface. Not light. Not warmth. A dim heat pulsed across the metal's edge, as if responding to breath it could not hear. Nothing flashy. Just a faint throb. When her hands covered her mouth and her shoulders trembled in silence, the disc answered, not to her sound, but to her sorrow. No one saw it. Not yet. But it had begun. Chains bit into wrists worn thinner than the metal that bound them. His arms hung in angles not meant for standing, yet he stood. Blood crusted at the corner of his mouth, dried to the color of old rust. Guards on either side shifted more than they needed to, their hands near weapons no one had drawn in years inside that chamber. The high ceiling swallowed sound. Every footstep, every breath, thinned into something brittle. No one spoke at first. A councilman cleared his throat. A priest squinted from behind a silk mask. Eyes passed between robes, across altars, toward the low pedestal where a stone no one had dared touch for decades remained mute. Cold. Dignified in its refusal. They brought him there to humiliate, to extract a confession soaked in dirt and nonsense. He offered nothing. Not until someone whispered that he had mentioned an oath. That was when the chamber leaned forward, not physically, but with the weight of listening no one wished to admit. The record of such an oath had faded long ago. Charred scrolls. Burned agreements. Forgotten translations between tongues no longer shared. He raised his head. Voice raw. Each word pulled up from something not taught but carried. First came the greeting. Not the formal one used by diplomats, but the ancestral phrasing, the one reserved for blood sealed across species during war, carved into bone when paper failed. One of the priests stiffened. A noble scoffed loud enough to be heard, hoping laughter might drown the discomfort of recognition. He kept going. His voice didn't swell. It didn't seek applause. He simply spoke as though each word were necessary to remain standing. A murmur passed through the third row. Not from understanding. From unease. Certain consonants hadn't been spoken in that room since before the last moon calendar was reset. The guards smirked. A captain gestured toward the door. But the man didn't move. Instead, he spoke the final line. The one that had no direct translation in court language. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't allegiance. It was memory. Shared, buried, bloodbound. The phrasing slowed, almost fractured under its own weight, but he didn't stumble. A groan passed through the floor. Not sound. Pressure. The air shifted, not violently, but with a precision that defied denial. Eyes turned toward the pedestal. The crown stone, still veiled in dust, released a pulse too faint to light the room, but enough to force silence. No one touched it. No one dared. But something old had acknowledged what had been said. Not to him. Not for his sake. Toward the kitchens, behind cold walls and shuttered hallways, a girl paused in the middle of scrubbing a pot that no longer needed cleaning. She froze. Not because she heard the words, not because she felt the pulse, but because a heat passed through her fingers as if the copper itself had remembered her. He lowered his head again. Not in defeat. Not in exhaustion. As if the act itself had cost more than the blood on his shirt. A guard cursed under his breath. The priest closest to the pedestal backed away without realizing it. Someone ordered silence. Someone else muttered a warning. The court's eyes darted. Not toward the man anymore, but toward the one place no one had been watching. The stone had moved. Not much. Just enough to remind them it still had a will. They brought her in through a side door. No one announced her. No drum, no title, no procession of rank. Just two guards who wouldn't meet her eyes and a priest who walked too quickly for dignity. Her feet were bare, soles bruised from stone and cold. Her shift hung loose, torn at the hem, stained with things that didn't wash out. She didn't ask why. The hall ahead answered with silence sharper than noise. Rows of faces leaned into shadows, unwilling to be recognized if this proved real. The relic had stirred. That could not be ignored. The council had argued through the night, not over law, but risk. To deny the stone's movement meant explaining why it had ever responded. To acknowledge it meant testing blood long presumed unworthy. They placed her in the center. No cushion, no pedestal, just cold beneath her knees and too much space around her body. One of the priests held the instrument, thin as reed glass, old enough to tremble in his hand. He reached for her arm, found the mark again, now exposed, unmistakable. He didn't speak to her. No one did. She didn't flinch when it pierced skin. Her blood fell into the vessel without resistance. No fanfare. No glow. Just the dark pulse of something ancient recognizing a truth no longer willing to stay buried. The color changed. Not immediately. First it sat quiet. Then it deepened, as if the air itself remembered what it once meant to see her blood outside the body it came from. They moved fast after that. Faster than ritual permitted. Memory extraction was forbidden outside coronation rites. They invoked emergency protocol none had uttered in 2 generations. A device older than the language now used to label it was dragged from the vault. It was cold to the touch. The priest who carried it wore gloves. She didn't cry when it was placed against her skull. The tremor came later. Not from her. From the chamber. Light rose, not outward but inward, as if the room no longer mattered. What opened next did not resemble vision. It resembled loss. A room, smaller than this one, filled with the warmth of hands too large for a child that small. He held her as if the world was ending. No crown. No robe. Just eyes rimmed with sorrow and the sound of a name no one had heard before. Not a common name. Not political. Something pulled from closeness. He whispered it again. Pressed her to his chest. Told her what she must never say. Where she must go. Who must never know. The image cracked once, split by the sound of boots climbing stairs no one should have climbed, and ended with a breath pressed to her brow. The chamber went still. Not quiet. Still. As if air dared not move. One priest dropped his censer. Another stepped backward without realizing. The device dimmed. Her body sagged, not from exhaustion, but the weight of recognition washing through marrow that had never been asked to remember. The mark on her wrist no longer mattered. The vessel of blood already told its story. This had been about belief. They'd seen it with their own eyes. Not invention. Not illusion. Memory had no reason to lie. She didn't lift her head. Didn't ask what it meant. But none in that hall could look at her the same way again. No need for confirmation. The truth was breathing in front of them. And it wore the face of someone they'd all chosen not to see. Steel touched stone first. The sound barely carried, but it struck through silence like a wound no one could hide. One guard dropped to a knee. Another followed, slower, confused. Their eyes moved without purpose, darting between robes, columns, corners of the chamber not meant to witness something sacred. No command had been given. No signal passed. Yet they lowered their weapons, not out of loyalty, but because the weight of standing no longer made sense. She remained where they left her, seated on the floor, arms limp against her sides, hair tangled across her collarbone. No crown. No robe. No announcement. Just presence. Just blood no longer denied. Whispers bloomed. Some sharp with fear, others tangled in doctrine. A councilman asked if the test had been tampered with. A high priest warned against speaking treason in sacred air. One of the nobles laughed dryly and suggested exile, not punishment, but precaution. Not rejection, but preservation. The suggestion tasted like ash, even before it finished leaving his tongue. The stone pulsed again. Not bright. Not loud. Just enough to remind every witness that decisions no longer belong to them. The doors behind the pedestal, sealed since the king's last breath, creaked apart without touch. Inside, light moved across carvings none had studied for generations. Runes etched in metal lit one by one. Only for her. Only when her feet pressed against the chamber floor and her shadow touched the steps leading upward. One voice cried fraud. Another called it divine error. But no hand moved to block her. No decree passed fast enough to stop what the relics had already answered. She took no joy in it. No expression passed her face. Just movement born from something quieter than pride, something deeper than hunger. The kind of movement that doesn't seek permission. A page stepped forward and dropped his scrolls. No one helped him. No one noticed. The guards kept their eyes low. Not in shame. In recognition. Not of royalty in theory, but of a truth too plain to argue with. One noble proposed an oath reversal. Another spoke of civil fracture. The court splintered by tone if not by act. But the center no longer held their authority. It had shifted. Blood had spoken. Memory had testified. And relics had chosen. No servant's child could open the sealed reliquary. No kitchen ghost could walk through the coronation gate and survive. But she had. Not because she asked to. Because the stone accepted her presence the way the throne once accepted her father's voice. By morning, guards flanked her not as captors, but as shields. The corridor no longer smelled of soup or blood. It smelled of fire and myrrh and old gold, scraped from chests no one dared open until now. Those who had mocked her avoided corners where her footsteps passed. Those who named her nothing found their mouths dry in counsel. The title had not been given, but it had already taken root. Not through vote or law. Through something older. Through proof. Through witness. Through a presence that refused to vanish just because it made people uncomfortable. She did not speak. Not yet. Her silence had always said more than their words. Water touched her skin before sunlight did. Cold. Unperfumed. Drawn from the oldest well beneath the foundation stone, where only royal rights were allowed to drink. No servant poured it. No priest chanted over it. She was not scrubbed, not scented. She washed herself. Alone. Quiet. Each motion stripped away something more than ash. The robe did not shimmer. It hung plain. Gray, hemmed in white, stitched at the collar with thread no one remembered how to replicate. It had waited in a locked chamber behind 4 seals. No one had spoken of it aloud in years. Not because it had been forgotten. Because saying its name would require naming what had been lost with it. She walked without guard, without signal. The corridor stretched too long. The silence tightened with each step. Not a hush of reverence, but the sound of memory rising from places no one wanted to revisit. The floor had been swept twice. Still, dust clung to the soles of her feet like a last defiance. The chamber waited open. Banners lined the walls, their colors dulled from age, not war. Light passed through stained glass, shaped in symbols only the throne recognized. She did not look at the watchers. She did not need to. Her path curved, not by design, but by tradition older than records. No one moved. Guards stood still, eyes locked downward. Nobles bowed without word. Their shoulders dipped not in unity, but resignation. Nothing in their posture spoke allegiance. Only recognition. The crown stone stood taller than her, its base thick with carvings no longer taught. 4 years it had refused every hand, every test, every plea. Today it shifted. Not toward her. It rose away from the pedestal, weightless, effortless, as if called by something no one else could hear. She stopped 3 paces before the dais. The chamber braced. Muscles tensed beneath armor. One breath stretched across every ribcage in that hall. The stone moved without touch. It hovered above her head, rotated once, and descended with no ceremony. No chant. No thunder. Just gravity acknowledging something it could not deny. Metal met skin. No sound followed. Not a cheer. Not a gasp. Only the scraping of cloth as figures lowered themselves without command. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. Her eyes lifted once, toward the far end of the chamber, where the torchlight didn't quite reach. He stood there, still, watching. Blood dried across his collar. Wrist still bound in chain. No one had bothered to remove it. She nodded once. No gesture. No name. Just acknowledgement. Not gratitude. Not victory. Truth passed without adornment. No one stood until she turned. And when she did, the weight in the room changed. Not by volume. Not by gesture. The center had shifted. Permanently. The guards found the cell empty before the first horn blew. No door broken. No chain cut. Just absence left like a coin on stone. A cloak hung over the edge of the cot. Folded. Dry. Dust lined the edges of the floor where boots had stood still too long. No orders had been given for release. No summons had been written. Yet no one searched. No alarm rang through the palace. Those who noticed chose not to speak. Not from fear. Not from confusion. From something harder to name. The kind of silence that follows recognition too heavy to contest. He walked beyond the gates without escort. No carriage. No coin purse. No weapon reclaimed. The guards parted as if he were wind. As if trying to stop him would mean answering questions no one wished to ask. The outer walls, still stained from a siege forgotten by most, watched him go. Sunlight had not yet reached the courtyard. The air tasted of iron and forgotten prayers. No voice called after him. No messenger ran to intercept. He crossed the dry path toward the old road where wheels no longer turned, where hooves had not struck in seasons. At the palace's highest chamber, a curtain moved once. No hand pulled it. No need. She stood there, wrapped not in regalia, but mourning. Crown resting where it had been placed, hands empty. She did not call. No word passed her lips. Her breath met the glass and faded. She knew his kind. Not through story. Through stillness. Through the way they never asked for reward. Through the way they watched more than they spoke. Through the way they walked toward endings without waiting to see how beginnings might unfold. He crossed the final stone arch, reached the edge where road met ruin. The desert waited without gesture. Sand untouched. Sky thin with light not yet born. He stepped forward. No turn of the head. No farewell. Just movement. Her rule began at that moment. Not when the crown stone lowered. Not when the court bowed. Not when her name spread through towns and border camp. It began when the one who could have stayed chose not to. Not from duty. Not from love. From belief. And belief, once given, could not be taken. Not by death. Not by time. Not even by silence.